This is Lakea, the librarian at the Vault of Nightmares. Your vault keeper is currently tied up right now, so I will be your host this evening. Hope you enjoy. Hunt Boy. My son was your average, typical child. He loved cartoons, hated vegetables, and his favorite pastime was playing in dirt with his Tonka trucks. When he was around 4 years old, we moved into an apartment. The building itself had been originally a hospital back in the 1800s. It was set on a hill up above the railroad tracks and the depot. The morgue had been in the basement, and the maternity ward had been upstairs in a room to the right. The front of the building still had its original long front porch where the patients would sit to get some fresh air. When you walked into the hallway through the two huge wooden front doors, you were greeted by two apartments to the right, a long hallway that went straight through the center of the building, and the staircase to the upper floor on the left. Our apartment was in the hallway, second door on the right, under the maternity ward where the babies and the sick children were kept. My son was excited at first about our new apartment, and settled right in at night. During the first month, we did have a few strange occurrences happen. Lights would flicker on and off all the time. We always heard walking in the upstairs rooms above us, like someone pacing. The issue with that was those rooms were locked and unoccupied. I know because I asked the landlord if we had new tenants the day I talked to her about the lights flickering. That is when she first told me the history of the building and showed me pictures from the 1920s. She explained to me that everyone who has ever lived here since they closed the hospital and turned it into an apartment building has had strange experiences. She said she couldn't explain the walking upstairs because only 2 other apartments were rented and both of them were downstairs. But she could assure me that just a few months back all of the wiring had been replaced and inspected. So I had nothing to worry about there. I just shrugged the whole situation off as if we were living in a strange building and left it at that. The next week is when my son Nate started acting different. He would take his favorite truck and go sit in one of the corners of the apartment and just talk. At first we thought he was just playing, letting his imagination run wild. Then we realized he was talking to someone. So, one day I went over to the corner where he sat and asked him who was he talking to. He told me, "Hunt Boy." I looked at him for a few moments and then calmly asked him who was Hunt Boy and what was his real name, like Nate was Nate's real name. My son told me very clearly, for a 4-year-old, that Hunt Boy was his friend and that he lived here. I asked my son again what was Hunt Boy's real name. Nate replied that that is what his friend wanted to be called, because he had his hunting overalls on. Now, how Nate even knew what overalls were at that age, I have no idea. I asked Nate if he could tell me about his friend. How old was he? What did he look like? The usual questions that a parent might ask about their child's imaginary friend. My son told me that Hunt Boy looked like him, so I assumed a blonde-headed person. And he told me that Hunt Boy was this tall, which Nate then stood up and held his hand to the top of his head. I repeated the question of asking Nate if he knew how old his friend was. My son replied with, "My age, Mommy." Then Nate sat back down on the floor and went back talking about his truck and pushing it over to his new invisible friend. That night I told my husband about my conversation with Nate, and we decided jointly that this must be a normal thing some kids do. We didn't see any harm being caused, so it was no surprise when Nate started asking for plates and cups at meals for his friend. It did start to get a little weird when we would go somewhere and Nate would demand that we couldn't close the car door until Hunt Boy was in the car and buckled in. We went through the same routine for about 2 months. In the meantime, we were still having unusual occurrences happening inside our apartment. One day, my friend called me out of the blue, and Kim asked me if she could come over and use our washing machine since hers was broken at the time. I told her sure and to come on over. About an hour later she arrived and I led her into our apartment. She sat her basket down and we stood there chatting for a few minutes. Nate walked over to the couch and asked if I could cut him some tunes on, meaning cartoons. So before Kim and I went to the laundry room, I turned on some cartoons for him and left him sitting on the couch with his imaginary friend. Me and Kim had to go through the kitchen to the laundry room. I stood there talking to her as she set her basket down on the floor and began separating her clothes. I helped her load the washing machine and was explaining to her how to operate it when Nate appeared between us. I told him I would be done in just a second and for him to go sit back down. Kim leaned down just a bit and said hello to him. When he didn't answer her, she just stood back up straight and asked me what laundry detergent did I like to use best. At this point, I felt a slight tug on the back lower edge of my shirt tail. As I turned to look at Nate again, so did Kim. Nate immediately turned without saying a word, walked over to the window, and walked right through it, right in front of both myself and Kim. We both screamed, thinking that Nate had just fell through the old glass panel window. It took us both a few seconds to realize that the window wasn't broken, and that Nate didn't walk back to us to exit through the only door in the laundry room. I ran full speed back through the kitchen and into the living room with Kim on my heels the whole time. And there, still sitting on the couch, was Nate, just like we had left him, except he was crying. We ran over to him, still thinking that he was hurt from the window. After quickly checking him over, I asked him why did he do that? Why did he walk into the window, and how did he get past us back out the door? He told me that it was not him, but Hunt Boy. Kim asked him who was Hunt Boy. Nate told her Hunt Boy was his friend, that he lived here for a long time after his father had killed him. He said Hunt Boy told him that it was time for him to go. So they said goodbye, and Hunt Boy told Nate that he was going to go tell me goodbye and thank me for taking really good care of him until his mom came to get him. Then Nate collapsed into my arms crying his heart out over the loss of his friend. Kim and myself just sat there on the floor staring at each other for the longest time. The silence was only broken by the random sniffle from my son. We stayed in that apartment a few more weeks until it just became too hard on Nate. Nate is 16 now, and every blue moon someone will bring up something about Hunt Boy. To this day, we still remember what happened. Nate has had many experiences since then with the other side. I suspect his gift is genetic, but those will have to be told another time. I will just leave you with this one to begin with.